Hello, everybody. Thank you for all being here today. Volunteers, supporters, partners, friends, and those of you who are supposed to be on the Lotus Flower online yoga class. I'm Mark Wolper, a longtime AFW board member and committee chair of the Endeavor Awards, which is supposed to be happening this very evening today. Right now, I probably should have been at the cleaners begging the folks to dry clean my tux in the next 2 hours. Nonetheless, and all the more, we are thrilled to have Tammie Jo Shults here with us today. She has been an amazing inspiration to so many people, especially pilots like us, like me, which is why she was to have received the Inspiration Award at the Endeavor event had it happened tonight. But not only has she generously offered to accept the award with the others next year, she's agreed to join us today at our virtual pilot lounge. So what is really important here is that we have pivoted from the Endeavor Awards to put our efforts and our time toward what is really needed: emergency assistance and response. Climb Above This Together is our critically important fundraising campaign to put resources where they are needed instead of a fancy party, I guess. Josh will speak more about that shortly, and you can see the link for more info in the chat box that I think should be on the right side over here. So your gifts help AFW continue to provide much needed supplies and relief support to areas most affected by this pandemic. Thank you, thank you, thank you for supporting us by volunteering, donating, spreading the word about our services. So it's time for me to shut up now and perhaps get my tux to the cleaners now for next year. I'm going to hand this over to Josh for the latest updates on our COVID relief flights and introducing Tammie. So take it away, Josh.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Mark, and our entire board of directors for your incredible leadership during this very unprecedented time. We're fortunate to have such great volunteers throughout our organization, including at all the leadership levels, whether it be the board of directors or our wing leaders and other wing volunteers. We are always uniquely positioned to help in terms of crisis and trying to do the same thing here. As Mark said, we wish we were celebrating our cause and our amazing pilots at the Endeavor Awards tonight. And we're super excited to have Tammie Jo Shults as one of our Inspiration Award honorees to join us today. Sad that I won't be celebrating with her in person, but also excited that we get a little bit more time to talk to her today. And I know that's why you're all tuning in and not listen to me. So we'll get through that. But we did have some questions and updates from our operations team at Angel Flight West. And thank you for those of you who joined us on our last virtual pilot lounge. As you know, in these times, updates happen on a daily basis. So we're constantly trying to pivot to meet those needs and serve the best we can through this crisis. We are excited today to announce there's 20 relief flights going out across mostly the Southwest. We are partnering with Project Cure and Love from Strangers to fly critically needed supplies into the Navajo Nation, the Hopi Nations, and in 9 different locations surrounding New Mexico, Colorado, Utah, and Arizona. I'm sure many of you have seen the incredible conditions that those Native American groups and peoples are going through currently. For those of you who don't know, 30% of that community is without running water. They've been on lockdowns over the last several weekends to try to control the spread and have been really hard hit with COVID without a lot of resources available to them. So we're doing what we can to make sure that we can get supplies needed to them. And we're super excited, and thank you for all those volunteers, pilots that are flying supplies there this week, along with our other partners. South Valley Regional Airport has donated space in its hangar. Falcon Field has been super helpful in that whole process, and Project Cure for making those supplies available. And if you know of others that have supplies, PPE that are being handled by nonprofits at low or no cost that need transportation issues, please let us know. Continue to let us know. A lot of people did afterwards, and we've got more opportunities coming there. The other thing that we're excited to share is through our partners at Alaska Airlines and some donated vouchers by Southwest Airlines, we've been able to help our healthcare heroes relocate to the front lines to help with those areas most affected by COVID. We've received hundreds of requests and have been arranging those flights and want to partner with them. And if you haven't, please follow our Facebook and you can see some of those stories, or follow Alaska Airlines Facebook and follow some of those stories. Really incredible people. I mean, we're inspired all the time by our healthcare partners, whether they be nurses, social workers, case managers, or doctors helping our patients. And it's been neat to turn around and help them help others. And we've been really proud of that partnership, and want to thank Alaska and Southwest for that. You'll see some information on the screen there if you'd like to request any COVID relief flights for a healthcare personnel or donate miles. You can do that now as well. And then we continue to serve our passengers that need access to treatment. We've been doing that thanks to your generosity and support through our Patient Assistance Fund, or No Passenger Left Behind. So with our donated commercial flights or paid commercial flights or other paid transportation, we're making those sure our patients who need that critically needed treatment can access it. And then you've also probably been following along in the news that most states that we operate now, hospitals have begun resuming treatment and elective surgeries and so forth. And we're following that need and knowing that our patients are going to need that transportation soon. And so we're revising our operations to accommodate that and make sure that our volunteer and patient safety is number one. We will have some more announcements that here in the near future. But really what we're doing is leaning into what we already do, which is rely on our healthcare partners to weigh those risk-benefit situations for our patients, for our volunteers, to deem what is essential and how essential. And then likewise with our volunteer pilots to make sure that they are constantly doing risk assessment, both in the safety of their flight, but also in the safety of their cabin. And in this case, that includes COVID. We've been so fortunate to have many doctors partner with us, some of which are Angel Flight volunteers, and we'll be communicating some of that information with you, and making sure everyone is aware of those risks, that they can assess those risks, that we're doing everything possible to mitigate those risks. And so it will look a little different, Angel Flight volunteering for Earth Angels and pilots moving on in 2020. And like some of those will include updated medical release waivers and pilot affirmations and some new suggested requirements for moving forward. And so we'll be in communication with all of our volunteers for that. If you have any questions on any of those things, you feel free to put it in the chat. We may not get to all the questions today, but we will be sending emails after this. And of course, you can always email us, info@angelflightwest.org, or josh@angelflightwest.org, or Sherry is answering questions today too on the Q&A down at the bottom. But her email is sherryc@angelflightwest.org. And so feel free to ask any of those questions. We'll try to get some of those after Tammie Jo. But like I said, if we don't have time to get to all of them, we'll get to them via email afterwards. So with that said, I just want to thank everyone again for your time, support, and volunteering. And I would like to introduce a brand new volunteer we have for Angel Flight. She and her husband, Dean, have signed up to be volunteer Angel Flight pilots, and are really excited about the opportunity to use their skills in flying to give back. I'm sure most of you already know our special guest, Captain Tammie Jo Shults. But for those of you who don't, Tammie Jo was one of the first female F-18 Hornet pilots in the US Navy, and later became a pilot for Southwest Airlines. As detailed in her captivating novel, Nerves of Steel, she received wide acclaim in 2018 when she successfully landed a Boeing 737 after an engine exploded at high altitude. She saved the lives of 148 passengers and crew. Tammie, as I mentioned earlier, wish I was joining you to raise a glass and celebrate public benefit aviation, but so gracious and thankful that you're going to join us next year in 2021 to do it all over again. I am personally inspired by your story. I know our volunteers are inspired by your story. So thank you for inspiring others through aviation. And I know you've got a lot of great things to say. And for those of you who haven't read her novel, you should check it out. It's really amazing, and quite a story from growing up, being exposed to aviation, being inspired, and what she's doing now. And so we wanted to thank you for joining. We've got some questions for you in a little bit, but I also just wanted to give you a chance to talk and introduce yourself, and as someone who's been used to dealing with crisis and dealing with fear in the cockpit and using your faith to overcome each of those, would love for you to share how that applies both now in this current climate of fear and crisis and moving forward. So thank you again for joining us, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Josh, and thank you, Mark. And what a great report that the hospitals are opening up so that patients in need can get back in there and get the health care that they need. So good news on that front. You know, fear is kind of the topic of the day. We've heard how we're fighting an invisible enemy, and we really always have. And talking initially to that issue of fear. And as a Christian, I've noticed that is God's most frequent advice and repeated command is do not fear. And I think that's because it does immobilize us and it neutralizes us. And in scripture, he gives us some logical legs of reason so that we can stand on that command and accept that advice. And that is, in Timothy, he tells us, I did not give you the spirit of fear, but the spirit of power, love, and self-control. And I think the reason he uses that word power is because it conquers fear. Just like light conquers darkness, they just cannot coexist. And so sometimes when you get, you know, all the pieces and layers of life get peeled down and you're to ground zero, it does matter what you believe in and where you put your faith in life. So I would have to say, I have found God's most winsome way in my life of pulling me off that bench of fear and back on my feet in life is through adventure. And I love Amelia Earhart's quote, adventure is worthwhile. And I would have to say, we're made for it. I think we need it. And I was pulled into the adventure of aviation by seeing it. Honestly, our ranch had a big hay barn, and the jets from Holloman Air Force Base anchored their dogfighting practice over it. I would normally be out there, you know, cleaning out stalls and stock trailers of organic fertilizer. And so aviation was definitely more exciting and cleaner to look at. So that's what drew me in. I read about it, and then I met a couple of pilots. So just as an encouragement to you pilots out there, just getting to meet one of you and talk to you can really be inspiring. Now, my first pilot that I met was at Career Day, and he basically just told me, I'm sorry, but this is Career Day, not Hobby Day. You need to go find something girls could do. But I met some other pilots along the way that were encouraging. I will have to say, just scooting a little further down the line to Flight 1380, and I know there's going to be time for us to have some question and answer among us, so I'm excited about that. But I was a captain on Southwest Flight 1380, but I was not alone. Commercial aviation is never a solo sport. It's always a team event. And I had an incredible crew with me. Darren Elliser was my first officer. My courageous flight attendants were Shanique, Mallory, Rachel Fernheimer, and Catherine Sandoval. So I have to say, so much of what we do, and I think in Angel Flight as well, it's a team effort. And there was some great takeaways from Southwest Flight 1380. I'll keep them overarching, and we can get into specifics through your questions. But my takeaways would have to be three major takeaways, and that's habits, hope, and heroes. Habits on a good day will be our instinct on a bad day. And we've been given that generous gift of choice of what are we going to make our habits. And then hope, we saw that day that hope doesn't always change your circumstances, but it changes you. And that can be more lasting. And then heroes. I saw so many that day. And most of them didn't have a title. They didn't have equipment. They were just people taking the time to see and the effort to act on behalf of someone else. We had 3 passengers on the way down that unbuckled, got up, left their oxygen masks, left their families to go towards a roaring, dangerous window to help pull a passenger back in. And Tim McGinty, Andrew Needham, and Peggy Phillips. So I have to say, those were the 3 takeaways, and they're expanded in the book, and we can certainly talk more about them if you like. But those are big takeaways that they're overarching more than just aviation.
Well, thank you, Tammie.
Sure.
As expected, we do have a few questions, so if you're comfortable, we'll just jump into those.
Sure.
Okay, great. So first question is, what was your first thought when you realized you lost the engine on that 737?
Well, Darren and I compared thoughts, and we had the same, and that was, we thought we'd been hit by another aircraft. It wasn't just a lost engine. The explosion just kicked the side, the captain's side. It was the #1 engine. And so we thought we'd been hit as well as losing an engine. And so we reacted in both of us lunging for the controls and gingerly bringing it back up, allowing the descent to continue, because at that high of altitude with a single engine, we wouldn't have been able to sustain level flight. We were full of passengers, heavy with fuel, but also that explosion, it peeled back the cowling of the engine, kind of like a banana, remaining attached, a banana peel remaining attached. And so that flailing in 500-mile-an-hour wind created an incredible shuddering. And then there was debris that took out chunks of the wing and the leading edge of the wing and tail, and the fuselage was hit, a number of windows, one of which gave way. We had just a tiny slice of a moment that we could look at that we could see our engine instruments, and we could see #1 rolling down. So besides being hit, we knew we'd lost #1. And then there was just such a shuddering, kind of like being in a snow globe that someone was shaking fiercely, because there was smoke pulled into the cockpit, as well as a condensation formed from the rapid depressurization, and then a roar that just smothered every sound. And so that was our initial thoughts, whenever it happened. That was as much as we knew for our first few minutes.
Great, thanks. And kind of a related question from another member of our audience. Given that all the alarms are going off and everything you just described, how did you and Darren mentally process and prioritize those alerts for handling via the QRH?
What's interesting is when we went back to listen to the cockpit voice recorder, neither one of us really wanted to relive it moment by moment, but decided it was something that we could learn from. And Darren and I were the only ones allowed in. No paper, no pencil, just Darren and I. And they said, well, you won't hear anything but the human voice, because that's what the recording is geared for. So when we listened to that again, we were shocked to hear all the alarms. We absolutely, whether we focused or we were in such red that everything else, I teased Darren and say, if it was a red light flashing, I didn't see it because I was in the red. So anything red disappeared. And neither one of us really remember the alarms and things going off. We just remember what we had that we could control. And we could control the rudder. So we got the aircraft back into balanced flight. We could control the wings. And so we were able to start our turns towards Philadelphia whenever we coordinated that. And then, but we knew we couldn't control our descending. We could control the rate a little bit, and we slowed it down so that the shuddering also had caused us not to be able to even read, the lights that were going off, the warning lights. We couldn't read them. There was just such a bone-jarring shudder going through. As we slowed it down, we were able to read and get the QRH out. But still, dialing in frequencies and stuff was tough. Darren, who was handling that most of the way down, would go, would grab it and dial past it and then back and just bracket it down until he finally got in the frequency.
Wow. I can't imagine. Another question from our audience. This comes from a younger audience. After reading your book and learning your backstory, I have been even further inspired to become a commercial airline pilot. I'm 17 years old, and what advice would you have for me as I prepare to begin my career in aviation in the very near future?
Well, first of all, whatever you're doing at 17, keep doing it. I'm telling you, life itself and all the problem solving that goes along with growing up is great training for being a pilot. So if you're involved in sports or music or drama or, whatever it is that you're interested in, keep that interest. You don't need to become monolithic and focused only on aviation at that age. At any age, truthfully, I think being a well-rounded person is part of being a well-rounded aviator. So obviously, COVID-19 has changed the landscape a little bit for how many pilot slots are open. But at 17, by the time you're ready to fly commercially, they'll be wide open again.
That's great. It looks like we may have lost Tammie Jo for a little bit. Tammie Jo, can you still hear me? Oh, there she is.
Oh, did something happen to us?
Yeah. No, I think we're good now.
Okay.
Well, thank you for that. Here's one from Kay Sundaram. Hi, Kay. Thanks for tuning in. What do you believe was your biggest skill set that allowed you to address this life-threatening emergency with such calmness and grace?
I would have to be very honest with you and just say, and shift off of actual aviating onto the foundation of life. Because I will tell you, that moment of getting control of the aircraft, getting to see we've lost number one, and then suddenly being just, a bone-jarring shudder that we couldn't focus our eyes, so we can't really see anything to help us. We couldn't communicate. Darren and I were able to use hand signals initially, but there was no communicating. And then not being able to breathe. It's a very isolating moment. And I remember just that speed train of thought rushing to those mental clips of what if, thinking this might be the day I meet my maker, because I'm not sure everything is going to stay on until we get this to a runway. And I really stopped short of that precipice and stepped back with a calm that I don't credit to myself. It was a calm knowing I wouldn't meet a stranger and that I meet with him every day. So then I had that calm to turn around and remain focused on what I need to, not become tunnel visioned on what I didn't need to be tunnel visioned on, and remain creative. We just had this unfolding of an unscripted combination of emergencies on the way down, and all the way down to, when we're over the city, realizing we can't add power. We thought we'd just add power and fly at least a fairly normal approach into Philadelphia. And when we got down there and realized when we add power on the right, all that drag on the left and adding power on the right, it put us sideways and more drag. So we became we started planning more of a glider approach into Philadelphia. And so I needed to have that calmness that gives you some creativity.
That's great. Thanks, Tammie. From Barbara, and we have a few of these related questions. First of all, she found your book awesome and inspiring, riveting in fact.
Thank you, Barbara.
What did you decide on what approvals were needed by the Navy or other naval pilot officers to name names of events? So what she's asking was, were you ever worried about any kind of retribution or negativity about detailing some of your stories, both in the Navy and with Southwest?
Oh, you know what? No, not at all. I only named the good guys. The bad guys know who they are, and quite frankly, I think they've had to deal with their consciences long before my book came out, so I'm not concerned.
Well, that's great. Tom Close was asking, were there any N1 or N2 or VIB indications or feel indications just before the fan blade let go?
Zero vibration from the engine instruments, zero anything. It was absolutely immediate.
Sarah Saller was asking, if someone wants to contact you, how do they do so? And do you have any social media?
You know, I have to tell you, I'm a bit of a dinosaur on social media. I'm getting into it, but I do have a website, captainshults.com, and I check that, but also I have somebody that helps me check that. If you write me a note, they usually notify me, send me your note in case I'm flying and I'm not checking those things. So captainshults.com, it usually has some other things. I have some little videos, short videos for younger readers, and usually if I've given a speech lately and it's an open speech, I'll post it there. I also have Captain Shults on Facebook.
Well, thanks. And we have a few questions regarding female pilots, so I'll kind of try to combine some of these, and thanks to our attendees for asking. What would be the best advice you can give to newer female pilots in this current climate, and what helped you get past of some of the roadblocks women are still trying to overcome?
Yes, and I will say, I've been flying 35 years now, and I always keep thinking when we come around a corner that, okay, I'm glad that, that's behind us. And just recently when I took some girlfriends with me to my home state and spent a couple of days, whenever we got ready to go back, it was in the wintertime. So I called ahead and I had shown the gentleman how to plug in my oil sump heater and told him, when I get ready to go, even though it's hangared, I'd like for you to plug it in. And I called back and asked for them to plug it in. And the manager of the airport said, no, you're hangared, you don't need it. And I told him, well, it's 19 degrees outside. And, I've got a Continental engine that has a good starter, but it's a little, persnickety in that I need the oil warmed up. So if you would do that, I had to talk like a good fellow to get him to plug in my oil sump. And I just noticed that when my husband asks for something that simple, they just say, yes, sir, and do it. And so unfortunately, not all of that is behind us. And number one, never let an offense get in the way of an opportunity. I think for men and women, we're all going to run up against things or people that would offend us. And it will do us no good to let that get in the way of a great opportunity. And sometimes I will say, being the green apple in a bushel of red apples and standing out, it did make me hone my craft a little more than if I was just one of the gang. So make sure that your motivation is a good one. You're not there just to prove a point. You're there to fly airplanes. Know your craft, and then be gracious. When at all possible, be gracious. You may have to take off the gloves someday, but be gracious all the way, as far as you can.
Well, excellent advice and wise counsel. Thank you, Tammie. From Jim, he wondered how, and you touched on this a little bit earlier, but how did your passengers and flight attendants react and handle the crisis situation on the Southwest flight?
Yeah, good question. Thank you, Jim. When it happened, the flight attendants did what they should do. They buckled up. It was so rough. But this is one of those lessons that I talked about hope. Whenever I made a quick PA, as soon as we got our masks on, talked to ATC, said we were headed to Philly, then I punched into the PA system and made a quick PA, because I knew, as startling as it was for Darren and I, it had to be mind-numbing in the back. And especially not knowing, are they still in control of this thing? And are we headed someplace specific? And so I just made a quick announcement that said, we're not going down, we're going into Philly. And the flight attendants, when they heard that, they unbuckled and headed down a very rough aisle so that they could help people get their masks on. Everyone had their mask on, just their mouth, not their nose. And so they were struggling to breathe. And they helped them. They also reassured them. And they had to do this yelling over 500-mile-an-hour wind. It was a roar, and things were just flying through the air. There was tiny debris that was flying through the air. And so they faced some rough situations. And they had sprained backs, bruised ribs, cuts, lacerations all over from doing this. But that's how my flight attendants reacted to it. The passengers who got up faced the same things. And then also getting closer to that dangerous window and helping Jennifer Reardon get back inside of the aircraft. Something that is, you know, that's a sacrifice of more than just safety to do that.
Yeah, some heroic sacrifice for sure. Dennis Malloy asked, what immediate psychological effects did you suffer or experience as a result of the rapid depressurization?
You know, it was funny. The first thing we noticed was not that we couldn't breathe. The first thing we noticed were these ice pick stabbing pains in our ears, because it was an explosive depressurization. So it went from 7,000 foot pressure inside to 32,000 pressure outside, and it did it instantaneously. So, you know, it's kind of like what, if you're not familiar with rapid depressurization, which you aviators, I'm sure you are, but for those that aren't, if you've seen a balloon pop, you've seen a rapid depressurization. It's air equalizing pressure rapidly and with force. So you take a balloon and how fast that pops, well, you can imagine the pressure differential was even greater between our aircraft interior and the exterior. And so that happened. And the psychological part of it was when you add that to the fact that now you're shuddering to a point you can't focus your eyes on anything and you can't hear anything. I think everybody had just a moment of isolation before they jumped into action or realization of pulling in all the inputs of what is exactly going on here.
Wow. Mark asks, when did the relief of the information come that you and your first officer had done everything right and the event was not caused by anything done by you? When did that set in?
Well, right. Truthfully, the realization that Darren and I hadn't done anything wrong to cause it was instantaneous. There's nothing you can do or not do to cause that. That was completely just a molecular anomaly within a blade that created all of this. So it wasn't able to be seen with the naked eye. There were no precursors, indications in the cockpit. So Darren and I didn't walk away from there burdened by the fact that we could have done something to prevent it. There was nothing we could do to prevent it. So I think that honestly helped all of us in just getting back on our feet and marching on in life. And then on the way down, as I said, it was an unscripted combination. We practice single engines every year. We don't practice them at 32,000 feet. We don't practice them with an exposed engine and multiple points of damage. And then hydraulic lines being severed, fuel lines being severed. You know, there were a lot of things that happened, and some of them we didn't know until it became evident later on. And then how much power was available to us? How did we get the aircraft turned around? And what what flap setting. We never trained or practiced landing flap 5. But since I could see just my wingtip and could feel how it felt like we were flying through a boulder field rather than through air, knowing I just wanted as little a flap as possible. We couldn't afford any more drag, and I didn't want any kind of asymmetrical flap issues going on. So flying a different flap, all of that combined to us walking away feeling like we were not perfect. We didn't get, I think there were 7 separate checklists we could have done, but we always prioritized aviate, navigate, communicate. And sometimes the aviate, navigate, we got right back to aviating again before communicating. You know, so we just kept that circle tight and reoccurring. And so we felt like we prioritized right. And the goal from the moment that happened, the goal was a safe landing, knowing that we can't control what's happening in the cabin. We can only get us all down into richer air sooner, as soon as possible, and on the ground to medical attention as quickly as possible.
What words of inspiration do you have for those in professions like nurses and patients currently that are enduring similar crisis today?
You know, I wanted to mention Peggy Phillips, who got up during the flight, was a retired nurse. And first of all, can I just say thank you? I know the jobs that you do, you are selfless in doing them, because no amount of pay, which I know you're underpaid, no amount of accolades or thank yous really cover all that you do. And the exposure and danger that you put yourself in. Thank you so much for being the in-between of between families and their loved ones when they can't go see them directly. And I would just have to say, you know, there is a time and a place when all good deeds will be rewarded. And I thank you so much. And I know you have a reward beyond our thanks waiting for you.
So one of our anonymous attendees heard that after you landed at Philadelphia, you walked through the cabin to check on the passengers. What were you feeling at that time?
Well, I would have to say relief. I went back as soon as I could to help our flight attendants, because quite frankly, often when we've had such a rough ride, when people get on the ground and the airplane is stopped, they want out. And whether there's stairs or not, they get out. There's 6 doors out, 3 flight attendants, and I just wanted to be able to help the flight attendants as well as let the passengers know what the plan is from there. And the passengers were amazing. It was a testimony to our flight attendants and how selflessly they had gone through and reassured passengers and helped out. But I had made a habit of, when things aren't normal, whether we're sitting waiting for weather to pass by, we've had a mechanical, I do walk through to let people have a chance to ask questions or me answer their questions. So much of our fear often is due to the mysteries involved around the subject. And if you can have some information, it really dispels a lot of the anxiety that we have about something. So I wanted to go through and be available to speak to, look in the eyes of each person, see if they had any questions, assure them help was on the way, and just give them information that I have. And so that was really, quite frankly, that was a habit I had on days that hadn't been so rough.
Have you and Captain Sullenberger had an opportunity to meet and discuss your experiences from Jeff Wright?
No, we have never met. My husband did reach out to him saying, you know, there might be some good advice he would have for Tammie Jo. And so I spoke to him over the phone, and he and his wife both were really gracious in their time and just giving us some ideas about navigating wisely through the next few months.
That's great. Well, he is also an Inspiration Award winner at Endeavor Award, so perhaps we can introduce the two of you in person finally next year.
Oh, that would be a treat.
Another one of our volunteer pilots who's also a retired commercial airline pilot, Kurt Taylor asks, did you take some time off after your episode, or did you end up flying, or when did you end up flying your next trip? He said he thinks he would need some time to decompress.
Yeah, you know, I think everybody recovers in a different pace. Like I said, walking away knowing there was nothing we could have done to prevent it. And then we did our best. It wasn't perfect, but we prioritized well on the way down. And having a husband that has, we've really kind of been in lockstep through aviation, both flying A7s, both flying F-18s, both flying for Southwest Airlines. I had such a great sounding board when I got home, and such a loving sounding board when I got home. I went back flying 3.5 weeks later.
And then a related question to that, Jim Lewis, what was it like getting back in that pilot seat on your next flight?
It was good. I have to say, it was nice to have a little slice of normal back in life, and flew with a great young, just a wonderful young man, fairly new to the company. We went down to Puerto Vallarta and back on the turn, and it was nice. I love flying. I love the people associated with flying. So it was nice to get back in the seat.
Well, I know you grew up as a farm girl, so got right back on the horse again.
Yes, yes, you're right.
One of our staff members, John Jerevek, asked, you mentioned a glider approach into Philadelphia. He was curious if you are a glider pilot, or did you fly sailplanes or any kind of gliders as part of your training?
You know what? No, I have not. It's on my bucket list. Our son, who's in college, got his glider rating before he left for college. So I'm a little envious of him. I give him a hard time and say, you know, you're always in the one-upmanship. I land with one engine, you've got to land with no engines, you know. But that is on my bucket list. I will say the Navy does a lot of, you know, what we call PPLs and HAPLs and LAPL approaches, where you take the aircraft to a certain altitude and then you take off the power. It's not the same as no thrust, but it's idle and you make it to the different key points to make a landing. So doing a lot of hand flying in the Navy and VFR maneuvering definitely helped that day. I tend to hand fly at Southwest through 10, usually 18,000 feet on the way up, unless it's a really busy airport and we need more heads out as well as heads in. So hand flying a lot, and doing Southwest promotes visual approaches because they're more economic, you know, they're quicker, and it keeps you sharp on having that hand-eye judgment of airspeed, altitude, the anticipated path. And that was really key that day, because we had to pull back power that we needed to get turned around, and then realizing really we just have the trade of altitude for airspeed to keep enough rudder authority, enough airspeed over the rudder for rudder authority to keep in balanced flight. And so that that judgment call of when to lower the gear and when to flaps and keep our nose down for airspeed. And then eventually the anticipated touchdown point kept creeping back from the touchdown zone to the numbers. And then we gave up airspeed and landed about 15 knots below target 5.
So Jim asks, prior to flying for Southwest, was there any crisis experience you had while flying that felt prepared you well for that particular crisis?
You know, yes, I would have to say I'd had a few incidents where airplanes were not behaving as they should. One was, and here kind of echoes back to one of my points that a young lady asking about, not letting an offense get in the way of an opportunity. So when I was instructing, I was a Sir grad. After I got my wings in the Navy, I made good grades, and my officer from one of my previous squadrons had requested me. So I got to go back and instruct for him a couple of years. Halfway through that point, new change of command, very different commanding officer, very different attitude towards women. And he just said, I will not have a woman teaching guns in my Navy. So I was pulled out of the guns instructor lineup and sent to teach out of control flight for a year. It's something nobody wanted to do, their one required flight. And I got to teach it every day for a year. And climbing up to 30,000 feet, departing the aircraft and allowing the student to recover or not, and then recovering it, climbing back up. And one day there was a mechanical, which we couldn't see, that had happened, and a fuel transfer wasn't happening properly on one of our fuel tanks, tip tanks. So when we did the first stall, the T2 whipped down into a spiral, which is more of a drill bit path rather than a flat spin, kind of like a maple leaf coming down. And at that time, the T2 NATOPS didn't have any recovery procedures for getting out of a spiral. They'd only done it at test pilot school when they asymmetrically loaded it heavily. So they didn't even have procedures. And on the way down, we were in test pilot school basically, and it was a fast trip down. I do remember, again, that adrenaline pump into your brain where you think a lot into a tiny slice of time. And I was getting married in a few weeks. And I remember thinking, this is going to be great. I am going to eject at over the airspeed limit and look like, a monster bride. And it's too late to take back the invitations. And so I had this thought process, and meanwhile, I'm just trying new and creative inputs with the stick and the rudder. And we had passed 10,000 feet, getting ready to pass 5, which was the ejection if you're not in control limit. And I just thrust the stick forward, kicked the rudders, and started for the ejection seat handle, but it wobbled into flight. And so I'd had those moments where I thought, this isn't going to end well. And just taking some time to try out some things and keep your head about you and fly out of it.
Wow, what experiences. So Jeremy Katz asked, he thinks it's stressed that the whole aviation system is designed to support safety. Is there anything that surprised you at the time or in hindsight about how the whole safety system worked to get you down safely?
I think a few years ago, commercial aviation kind of had a big shift in their training, which was fabulous. And so instead of just going in and doing these routine emergencies and canned reactions to them, they started having us practice these emergencies. Your rejected takeoffs, your engine failures, different flap settings for landings. Definitely, we practice those because you want those muscle memory, those mental memories to kick in. But then we would do a scenario training where it was done in real time, and there isn't the perfect solution. They want you to problem solve, and so they're not looking for a cookie cutter flight from you. They want to see you have more than one option. We always do. And I think that was a great help in not freezing up to, okay, we have an engine failure, we should do this. We have a hydraulic failure, single failure, we should do this. We have a rapid depressurization, we should do this. Because none of those would have worked out right that day. We had to combine them. And also having that systems knowledge so that you realize, okay, this heavy, we are not going to try to maintain altitude. Altitude is behind us. That's not important anymore. Adjusting our descent is, but maintaining altitude isn't. So I think there's a great and appropriate emphasis on safety. What I think we have shifted to also is a practical use of all of those things, not siloing procedures and safety and system knowledge. They're all together. They need to talk to each other.
Okay, we have a few questions, Paolo and Anonymous, around what you fly personally, and I'll add that because I know you and Dean are volunteering your own aircraft for Angel Flight. So one, what aircraft are you flying when you're flying for fun? And two, either some experiences you've had that have encouraged you or Dean about Angel Flight, and or what you're looking forward to about that type of flying.
Well, in fact, we just sold our Cardinal 177, or in the process of it, and that's what we have flown. We took it from South Texas to Alaska and back. Unbelievable little airplane. It just our son learned to fly in it. But now we have an 87 Piper Malibu, and love it. I have to tell you, I love it more every time I fly it. And that's what we hope to use. That's what we're going to be using for Angel Flight when we volunteer. It has room for people to stretch out. You know, there's 4 seats besides the 2 in the cockpit itself. And so I think that'll be helpful. Bigger, useful load, of course. And so we're excited about that. And the reason we are excited about Angel Flight is because, and one of a tenderness with each other and a caring of each other. I think part of it was just realizing the value of human life that day and having lost one life. And, you know, we are called to look out for each other. And I think adventures in life prepare us for the adversities, but not just for ourselves. I think all that goes into where we are. Josh, what groomed you to be so good at what you do for Angel Flight? Mark, the same for you. I think those things, those adventures that drew you in, they weren't just for you. They're for other people. I think we're called to use what we have, whether it's abilities, resources, influence, whatever it is, we're called to use that for other people's benefit, not just for our own. And Angel Flight is a perfect example of giving.
Well, thank you. I couldn't have said it better myself, so I'll say amen to that. You and Mark will have to trade notes about Piper Malibu. That's what he's been flying Angel Flights in for 10, 15
excellent.
years. Yeah. And I think we're getting up to our end of time. Actually, there is one funny question from Jerry Fan that I think I'll end with.
Okay.
He asked, when you and your husband have a disagreement, have you ever said, oh yeah, well, can you land a plane with an exploded engine?
No, but I will say this. Whenever I landed and everything was taken care of, everybody was off the aircraft, I'd stowed my oxygen mask like a good little pilot should, and I'm gathering my things. I took a picture of the engine out the open door, and I texted my family so they would hear it from me, not on the news. And I texted my mom, my husband first, and my kids, my mom, and our son had just learned to fly and gotten his private license, and he's a senior in high school, and so you kind of have his profile already. And my husband said, is that your flight? Or is that yours? And I told him, it's not mine. I flew it, but it belongs to Gary Kelly. And my mom, of course, oh, I'm so glad you're okay. Our son texts me, well, there's a reason Southwest gives you 2. And I always land with 1 engine. And so, yeah, every once in a while we roll our eyes at that. But no, when Dean and I usually don't cross swords like that.
Sounds like wise advice. You know, many pilots feel like their way is always right, but I appreciate Appreciate that levity. And I just wanted to thank you again for your generous time. We're excited to have you as a volunteer and to get you know you a little bit better, and to celebrate, when we're on the other side of this crisis in 2021. So Tammie Jo, I just want to say thank you and Dean so much for your life of service and for these inspiring words today. We greatly appreciate it, and just wish you all the best.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. Hope you found that as inspiring and encouraging as I did. I never cease to be amazed at the kind of amazing people that Angel Flight and volunteer pilots attract. It is a really great group and an inspiring one. And I want to thank you all for joining us. Before we wrap here, just again, want to kind of circle back on how you can help. And so many of you, just judging by all the names I see on the attendee list here and the questions and Q&A, are already volunteers. And that is absolutely the most valuable thing anyone can do, is volunteer their time and energy for Angel Flight West. So thank you for that. As I mentioned earlier, those of you who might have connections to healthcare PPE providers, and or healthcare personnel in need of transportation or support, please contact us on the links provided in the Zoom webinar chat, and that was highlighted earlier. You can see here a page where you can learn more about it and get more involved. And then also, as we continue to serve through the crisis, for those of you, I know it's a difficult time for most, but for those of you that can support financially, we would welcome your donations and support in that way to our Emergency Assistance Fund, so that we can make sure we're as sustainable as possible moving forward and in the best position to continue to serve our passengers. As we emerge from volunteer flown passenger flights, I just want to thank you all for carefully considering those opportunities with your family. And I applaud you if you decide that the decision not to fly and or drive is the safest for you and your family. We commend that and applaud that. And then likewise, for those of you who carefully weigh this with your family and considerations of how you want to volunteer moving forward and decide that you are aware of the risks and comfortable with those to serve others that are in need, we applaud that as well. So we just want to thank you both and appreciate your connectivity and communication moving forward, so that we can respond and plan accordingly. So like I said, you'll see some more communications here in the coming days and weeks, and we welcome your feedback on any of those. And I always welcome anyone's feedback personally, and anyone feel free to email me. Again, my email is josh@angelflightwest.org, or you can kind of reach all of us at info@angelflightwest.org. I just again want to say thank you to all of our volunteers, to our partners. I mentioned Alaska and Southwest earlier, of which Tammie Jo flew for, our sponsors for Endeavor Awards that were generous enough to roll their support into our current efforts to be part of the solution to the COVID crisis. And all of you who just joined and spent the valuable time in your day today to join us, we just want to say thank you. We look forward to doing this again in 2 weeks. You'll have the opportunity to hear from some more experts in the field, and look forward to communicating there, and we'll continue to email you. There was one question in the chat. We will make this available offline, and we'll get to the questions that we were unable to answer there in written form, and we'll do that via follow-up on email. If you have any other questions and concerns, feel free to email us. And have a great weekend, and thank you all so much. We will climb above this together, so wishing you blue skies and tailwinds. Thanks so much.